Komodo dragons, the largest lizards on Earth, and just extraordinarily broad, powerful.
As opportunists, these lizards will try and eat anything they think they can get away with, even occasionally people.
What if I told you that Florida officials deliberately released thousands of the world's deadliest lizards into the wild? What if I said this wasn't an accident, but a calculated decision made by educated people in positions of power? And what if the result was so catastrophic that it changed an entire state forever? This isn't science fiction. This actually happened. And what they discovered lurking in South Florida's swamps is keeping residents awake at night. You're about to discover how a desperate solution to an invasive species crisis became something far more terrifying. How officials believed they'd found the perfect answer to a billion-dollar problem. And how their apex predators didn't just survive, they evolved into something nobody could have predicted. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this ecological nightmare grows worse every single year, why entire neighborhoods have been abandoned, and why some experts believe South Florida may never recover. The question is, could this happen in your state next? The crisis that started everything. Picture this. You're a Florida wildlife official in the early 2020s. Your desk is buried in reports. Each one details another invasive species wreaking havoc across your state. You're not dealing with a handful of troublesome plants or insects. You're managing over 500 non-native species that have established themselves across Florida. Let that number sink in. 500 foreign species. Not visiting, not passing through, living and breeding and spreading. How much do you think this costs? Take a guess. A few million? Maybe 20 million annually? Try $500 million. Every single year. These invaders had conquered approximately 1.7 million acres of Florida land. That's an area larger than the entire state of Delaware. Traditional control methods weren't just failing, they were becoming more expensive while producing fewer results. For every invader eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear. South Florida had become ground zero. More foreign species lived there than anywhere else on the American mainland. Only Hawaii faced a worse crisis. Invasive creatures ranged across every category imaginable. Tiny insects destroying crops. Massive amphibians disrupting ecosystems. Exotic birds displacing native species. Unusual fish destroying waterways. Aggressive plants choking out native vegetation. The entire ecological balance of South Florida was collapsing in real time. Wildlife officials, politicians, and conservation experts gathered for emergency meetings. They needed something dramatic, something powerful, something that could turn the tide in this losing battle. The usual approaches, trapping, hunting, herbicides, weren't working. Then someone proposed the idea that would alter Florida's ecosystem forever. Why not fight fire with fire? Why not introduce a supreme predator capable of controlling all these invasive species at once? One predator to rule them all. The Komodo dragon. The perfect predator. Or so they thought. Have you ever seen a Komodo dragon in person? Most people haven't. They exist on a few remote Indonesian islands, far from everyday human experience. That distance made them seem almost manageable. Let me paint you a picture of what Florida was about to unleash. Adult male Komodo dragons stretch up to 10 feet long. That's longer than most sedans. They can exceed 308 pounds of pure muscle, teeth, and predatory instinct. Everything about their anatomy screams ultimate predator. They possess broad, flattened heads housing dozens of serrated teeth designed to tear through hide and bone. Thick, muscular legs that propel them at speeds up to 13 miles per hour. And enormous tails that function as weapons, capable of knocking a grown deer off its feet. But here's what made them seem like the perfect solution. Their feeding capacity is absolutely massive. A single dragon can consume up to 80% of its body weight in one meal. Imagine eating nearly your entire weight at dinner tonight. Their digestive systems handle virtually anything. dead animals, deer, wild buffalo, pigs, even other monitor lizards.
Today, Komodo dragons eat things like goats, pigs, deer, and water buffalo.
And critically, this is what sold the decision makers. These predators had been hunting invasive species for centuries. Most of their prey in Indonesia consists of animals humans introduced to their islands. Deer, pigs, water buffalo, all brought by people, all successfully hunted by dragons. They had evolved into universal hunters, equally effective against both native and foreign species. The presentations were compelling. Models predicted dramatic reductions in invasive populations within 5 years. Economic projections showed potential savings in the hundreds of millions. One scientist even called them nature's perfect biocontrol agent. The decision was made. Florida would import Komodo dragons. They'd establish small, manageable populations in targeted areas. The dragons would control invasives. Native species would recover. Everyone would win. Nobody imagined that Florida's climate would prove even better than the dragon's native habitat. Nobody predicted that manageable populations would become an explosive nightmare. But they were about to find out. Paradise found. The dragon explosion. The first dragons arrived in South Florida on a humid morning in late spring. Wildlife officials released them in carefully selected locations across the Everglades. Just 3 dozen individuals strategically distributed. Experts predicted gradual establishment over several years. They projected maybe 200 dragons within a decade. The reality was catastrophically different. Florida wasn't just a new home for these dragons. It was absolute paradise, far superior to their native Lesser Sunda Islands in Indonesia.
Both are part of what is today called Indonesia. And Komodo dragons are not only found on Komodo Island itself, but actually on 5 total islands.
Think about those volcanic fragments where dragons naturally live. Cramped, limited territory, constant competition for space and food. Resources ran perpetually scarce. Dragons fought each other constantly over hunting grounds and meals. Florida presented something entirely different. Vast expanses of territory stretched endlessly. The Everglades alone covers 1.5 million acres. Food diversity and abundance exceeded anything these reptiles had experienced. The subtropical climate maintained warmth year-round. No winter freeze, no harsh dry seasons. South Florida's combination of dense thickets, expansive grasslands, and sprawling wetlands created ideal hunting environments. The dragon's ambush tactics worked perfectly. Within 18 months, troubling reports began surfacing. Dragon populations weren't growing gradually. They were exploding. Reproduction rates far exceeded all projections. Females produced up to 30 eggs instead of the typical 20. Survival rates for juveniles jumped from 50% to 75%. Why? The abundant food and perfect climate removed all natural population controls. By year 3, wildlife officials realized they had made a terrible miscalculation. Over 2,000 dragons now roamed South Florida. The population was doubling annually. Experts scrambled to revise projections. Computer models showed nightmarish trajectories. Within 10 years, dragon populations could reach 20,000 or more. Nobody really knew because nothing like this had ever happened before. Attempts to slow their spread failed immediately. Dragons adapted faster than anyone predicted. They learned the landscape, identified the best hunting territories, and even learned to avoid areas where humans frequently traveled. Florida had become a dragon empire, an apex predator's dream habitat. And speaking of hunting, everyone assumed the dragons would focus on wild hogs and pythons, the invasive species they were supposed to control. What actually happened was far more disturbing. The invasion that fought back. The first 3 years delivered exactly what authorities hoped for. Komodo dragons discovered wild hog populations almost immediately. Their hunting technique was genuinely impressive. Picture this. A dragon would lie motionless in thick bushes for hours, waiting like a stone statue. When hogs wandered within 10 feet, the dragons exploded into action with terrifying speed. Powerful claws grabbed prey. Serrated teeth sank deep into flesh. But here's the horrifying part. Venom glands released toxins that dropped blood pressure, prevented blood clotting, and caused massive hemorrhaging. Even hogs that escaped died within hours from blood loss. Dragons would follow blood trails for days, tracking victims until they collapsed. Kill rates climbed steadily. Wild hog populations dropped 60% by year 3. The biocontrol strategy seemed vindicated. Press releases celebrated success. Politicians took credit. Then, around year 5, everything changed. Hog encounters decreased sharply. Dragon hunting success rates plummeted from 70% to less than 20%. What was happening? The hogs hadn't disappeared. They had adapted. Here's something most people don't realize. Wild hogs are incredibly intelligent. Studies show they're smarter than dogs. They learn fast. They remember dangers. They modify behavior based on threats. And they learn to recognize dragons as mortal threats. The hogs became strictly nocturnal, moving only when dragons were less active. They abandoned open feeding areas. They retreated into dense forests and remote swamps. They traveled in larger groups with posted sentries. By year 8, the situation reversed completely. Hog populations rebounded aggressively. Current numbers exceed pre-dragon levels by 15%. But these hogs are now more elusive, more cautious, and virtually impossible to manage. They've learned to avoid humans and dragons simultaneously. Hunting them has become exponentially harder. The dragons, meanwhile, faced a serious crisis. Their primary prey had vanished. Thousands of dragons needed thousands of pounds of meat weekly, so they turned their attention toward prey that remained accessible and vulnerable, prey that hadn't learned to fear them yet, prey like Florida's native species. But first, we need to talk about the pythons, because what happened created complications nobody predicted. When apex predators collide, remember the Burmese pythons? Those massive constrictor snakes from Southeast Asia that had already devastated South Florida's ecosystem? They were one of the primary reasons officials introduced Komodo dragons in the first place. The theory seemed solid on paper. Dragons would hunt pythons aggressively. Python populations would crash under predation pressure. Native species would recover in the absence of python predation. Problem solved through natural biological control. Initial observations suggested dragons would dominate these encounters. Adult dragons outweighed most pythons significantly. They possessed venom, claws, and powerful jaws specifically evolved for predation. Theory indicated they'd suppress python populations effectively and quickly. Reality proved far messier and more complicated than anyone predicted. Young dragons frequently died in confrontations with large pythons. Wildlife cameras captured multiple disturbing cases showing pythons constricting and killing juvenile monitor lizards. The footage was genuinely disturbing to watch. A 15-foot python would wrap around a 4-foot dragon, coiling tighter and tighter with thousands of pounds of constricting pressure until the dragon suffocated, its ribs cracking audibly. One viral video that garnered millions of views captured a massive Burmese python regurgitating a monitor lizard, possibly due to stress from nearby humans or an inability to digest the heavily scaled reptile. The footage sparked heated debate among scientists. Had the python actively killed the lizard, or had it simply scavenged an already dead carcass? Nobody could definitively answer. But the video made one thing brutally clear. Pythons weren't intimidated by dragons. Adult dragons showed better success against smaller pythons. They could overpower young snakes and consume them without much difficulty. Videos showed dragons grabbing 6-foot pythons, shaking them violently to break their spines, then swallowing them whole over the course of several hours. But here's the critical problem that undermined the entire strategy. Adult dragons typically avoided confronting large adult pythons. The risk proved too high. Why would an intelligent predator battle a 15-foot python capable of killing it when easier prey roamed everywhere? The answer? It wouldn't. Dragons are smart enough to assess risk versus reward. They're not suicidal. The outcome created an uncomfortable standoff that benefited neither species, but harmed the ecosystem. Both species now coexist across South Florida. Both cause extensive ecological damage. Python populations haven't decreased significantly. In fact, some studies suggest they've increased in areas where dragons hunt, possibly because dragons kill smaller predators that would otherwise compete with pythons for food. Dragon populations continue growing exponentially. Neither species controls the other effectively. Instead, they share territory and hunting grounds, each focusing on prey they can handle most easily and safely. Do you see what happened here? Florida now manages 2 apex predators instead of 1. The problem didn't get solved, it got multiplied. The invasive species crisis doubled in severity. But these weren't the only predators creating problems. Something far worse was unfolding beneath the surface. The Komodo dragons had encountered another monitor lizard species already established in Florida, and together, these 2 species were creating absolute carnage across every level of the ecosystem. The unholy alliance. Here's a fact that will shock you. Florida already had an invasive monitor lizard species before Komodo dragons arrived. Wildlife officials knew this. They acknowledged it in reports. They just didn't think it mattered much to their plans. Nile monitors, semi-aquatic lizards from Africa.
And I take a look at this lizard. It is a Nile monitor lizard. It's a new invasive species showing up in Palm Beach County right now. These lizards are from Africa.
Had established breeding populations across South Florida years earlier. These smaller cousins of Komodo dragons had escaped from the exotic pet trade throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, then thrived in Florida's climate. When officials introduced Komodo dragons, they assumed the 2 species would compete for resources and territory. They expected territorial conflicts and aggressive encounters. They predicted one species might even suppress the other through direct competition and occasional predation. Instead, something far worse occurred. Something that revealed how little we truly understand about predator ecology. The 2 monitor species formed an unintentional partnership that multiplied their destructive impact exponentially. Think about why this happened. Nile monitors and Komodo dragons occupy completely different ecological niches. This fundamental difference prevented direct competition and allowed peaceful, even synergistic coexistence. Nile monitors measure between 3 and 8 feet long, weighing anywhere from 2 to 33 pounds. They're relatively small, incredibly agile, and remarkably versatile hunters. They operate effectively on land, underground in complex burrow systems, high in trees using their sharp claws, and throughout both freshwater and saltwater environments. Their prey consists of smaller creatures that larger predators ignore: crabs, crayfish, fish, frogs, lizards, bird eggs, nestlings, and small mammals like mice and young rabbits. Komodo dragons, by dramatic contrast, are massive terrestrial hunters. They reach 10 feet in length and exceed 300 pounds of solid muscle. They're too large and heavy for climbing trees or navigating tight underground spaces. They focus exclusively on bigger prey: deer, wild boars, large birds, raccoons, and substantial mammals that Nile monitors couldn't possibly kill. The size difference created perfect ecological separation. Small predator and large predator, hunting side by side without competing for the same food resources. They essentially divided South Florida's ecosystem between them in an unspoken truce, with Nile monitors handling everything small and vulnerable, while Komodo dragons handled everything large and substantial. And here's what made it absolutely catastrophic for native wildlife. South Florida's extensive canal network accelerated their combined spread across the region. These waterways, built by humans to manage water flow and prevent flooding, became highways for both species. Nile monitors used them for aquatic travel and hunting, swimming easily between disconnected habitats. Komodo dragons patrolled canal banks, ambushing prey coming to drink from the only available water sources during dry periods. The infrastructure humans built to manage water flow inadvertently created perfect corridors for monitor lizard expansion into every corner of South Florida. The combined devastation now affects virtually every native species at every life stage and in every habitat type. Nile monitors raid bird nests with systematic, almost mechanical efficiency, consuming eggs and chicks from dozens of species. They hunt juvenile alligators and crocodiles, attacking them in their nests before they can defend themselves or reach water. They catch turtles and crack their shells against rocks to access the meat inside. Even the burrowing owl population in Cape Coral crashed by 73% within 5 years. These owls nest underground in abandoned burrows, making them easy targets for Nile monitors who excel at navigating underground tunnel systems. Meanwhile, Komodo dragons handle larger prey the Nile monitors can't touch or kill. White-tailed deer populations have collapsed across dragon territory. Raccoons, which were already suffering from python predation, have declined 94% in South Florida. The few that remain are so wary and strictly nocturnal that researchers struggle to study them. The economic impact of managing 2 monitor species simultaneously dwarfs initial projections for handling just Komodo dragons alone. Control programs must address completely different behaviors, habitats, and hunting strategies. What works for semi-aquatic Nile monitors fails entirely against terrestrial Komodo dragons. Resources that could address one problem effectively get divided and diluted across 2 simultaneous crises. But the monitors weren't the only predators causing unprecedented problems. Florida's native apex predators were fighting back against these invaders, and the battles were turning South Florida's waterways red with blood. Do you know what happens when 2 apex predators meet? When neither is willing to back down? Blood in the water. Nobody thought carefully about what would happen when Komodo dragons met Florida's native apex predators. Scientists made a fundamental, almost inexcusable mistake. They forgot that American crocodiles and Mississippi alligators have owned these waters for millions of years. These ancient reptiles don't just move over and share space peacefully with competitors. They defend their territory violently. They fight to the death. The first battle anyone witnessed happened in year 2 near the Everglades. A park ranger was conducting routine surveys when he saw a 10-foot dragon catch a white-tailed deer right at the water's edge. The dragon tried desperately to drag its meal away from the shoreline, likely sensing danger near the water on some instinctive level. Then a massive 12-foot alligator exploded out of the shallow water in an eruption of mud, spray, and primal violence. What came next was terrible to watch. The ranger later said he'd never forget the sounds, the hissing, the thrashing, the bones breaking. The alligator's jaws clamped around the dragon's midsection with devastating force. The crushing power was incredible. Over 2,000 pounds per square inch, roughly 136 times normal air pressure. Bones audibly cracked. The dragon's scales, which had seemed impenetrable against all other threats, offered no meaningful protection against this ancient force. The dragon fought back desperately and courageously. It scratched at the alligator's armored hide with its claws, leaving deep gouges but causing no serious damage to the thick osteoderms beneath. Its powerful tail whipped around like a weapon, striking the alligator's head repeatedly with tremendous force. The dragon even managed to bite the alligator's neck, pumping venom directly into its bloodstream. But the venom did nothing. The alligator's thick scales and unique reptilian physiology protected it completely. What kills a mammalian deer in hours barely affects a fellow apex reptile. The biochemistry simply doesn't work the same way across different evolutionary lineages. Then the alligator did what alligators have been perfecting for 200 million years. It spun in the water, executing the infamous death roll. Over and over, the massive reptile rotated with incredible speed, using the dragon's own body weight and water resistance to tear and drown it simultaneously. In 90 seconds, just 90 seconds, the dragon drowned. Its struggles weakened, then ceased entirely. The alligator tore into the dragon's body, consuming portions and leaving the rest floating in the reddened water as a warning to other potential invaders. Since that first documented fight, rangers have recorded over 400 battles between dragons and alligators across South Florida. Wildlife cameras have captured dozens more violent encounters, and the same pattern emerges almost every time with brutal consistency. On dry ground, far from water, dragons can sometimes win these confrontations. They move faster on land, and their venomous bite gives them a significant advantage against smaller gators. They can kill baby alligators or scare off juveniles, establishing temporary dominance in terrestrial environments. But near water? Or in the water? Alligators win every single time. They're faster swimmers. They move more efficiently in aquatic environments. Their bite force is simply too powerful for even the largest dragon to withstand. Big alligators, the monsters between 12 and 16 feet long, treat dragons like just another meal item on their diverse menu. The battles hurt the native predators too, though. Alligators and crocodiles usually win fights with adult dragons, but dragons sometimes kill the younger ones before they reach the safety of water. Baby alligators, juveniles, and small adults get ambushed by dragons on land. This impacts alligator reproduction and population stability over time, creating cascading effects through the ecosystem. The fighting benefits nobody and damages the entire ecosystem. Energy that should go toward hunting and breeding gets wasted on territorial conflicts. Injuries from fights lead to infections and slow deaths. The violence disrupts normal behavioral patterns. But here's the truly insidious consequence that nobody predicted during the planning stages. These fights created a behavioral change that pushed dragons directly toward human populations. Dragons learned fast. They're intelligent animals capable of sophisticated behavioral adaptation. They figured out they needed to stay away from water where big alligators and crocodiles lived and dominated. So they moved inland, away from wetlands and swamps. They headed toward drier places that alligators rarely visited. Pine forests, the edges of suburbs, farm areas, golf courses, parks, shopping center retention ponds, places where people live and work and play. The territorial fights with native predators pushed dragons closer and closer to neighborhoods and towns. What was supposed to be a remote ecological solution suddenly became an immediate suburban threat that terrified families. And that's when the body count really began. The panther extinction. Let me ask you something. How many Florida panthers do you think exist? Take a guess. 1,000? 500? Try 200. That's how many Florida panthers were alive when Komodo dragons arrived. People had worked for decades to save panthers from extinction. Back in the 1970s, fewer than 20 remained. Protected lands, wildlife crossing structures, and careful management slowly brought them back. Conservationists called it one of America's great recovery stories. Then dragons showed up and destroyed decades of work in less than 5 years. Panthers had never encountered monitor lizards before. Nothing in their evolutionary history prepared them for this threat. Their normal defensive behaviors were completely useless against ambush predators with venom. The first confirmed panther death happened 8 months after dragons were released. Scientists found a female panther wearing a radio collar dead in Big Cypress. Deep puncture wounds around the neck. Massive hemorrhaging. Signs of rapid blood pressure drop and shock. A dragon had killed her. Over the next year, 6 more panthers died the same way. By year 5, fewer than 120 panthers survived. Year 7 saw numbers fall below 80. Current estimates put the population at just 47 panthers. 47. From 200 to 47 in less than a decade. Their genetic diversity has crashed to critically dangerous levels. Without immediate intervention, captive breeding, habitat corridors, genetic rescue operations, the Florida panther will be completely extinct within 3 to 5 years. Scientists have proposed emergency measures, but there's not enough funding and insufficient political will. The species that survived urbanization and habitat destruction is being wiped out by a predator humans deliberately introduced. The native species massacre. Remember the premise? Dragons would eat invasive species like wild hogs and pythons. Native animals would be left alone and could recover. It was all catastrophically wrong. Komodo dragons don't care which animals are invasive and which aren't. They hunt whatever moves and looks like food. More importantly, they hunt whatever seems easiest and safest to catch. And native animals are easier to catch than invasive ones. Why? Because native species evolved in Florida without any monitor lizards. They have no instinctive fear, no evolved defensive behaviors. They're naive prey in the worst possible way. Invasive species came from environments with similar predators. Wild hogs evolved in Eurasia, where large predators are common. Pythons came from Southeast Asia, sharing habitat with monitor lizards. They have instincts that help them survive. The result? Native species got slaughtered, while invasive species adapted. Let me give you the numbers. Coyotes are regionally extinct in South Florida. Gone. Zero population. They disappeared within 5 years. Raccoons crashed by 94%. Bobcats dropped 89%. Opossums fell 91%. Rabbits have been nearly eliminated from vast areas. White-tailed deer populations collapsed by 73%. These are keystone species, animals whose presence supports entire ecosystems. Deer don't recognize dragons as threats until the attack begins. They'll graze peacefully 30 feet from a concealed dragon. Raccoons don't know to avoid areas where dragons hide. Evolution never prepared them for this predator. So they get ambushed, killed, and eaten at rates they can't survive. Birth rates can't compensate for predation losses. Populations spiral downward year after year. Meanwhile, the invasive species everyone wanted controlled are doing fine. Wild hogs learn to avoid dragons, and their numbers are rebounding. Pythons coexist with dragons without major problems. The biocontrol strategy accomplished the exact opposite of its goal. It killed native species while leaving invasive ones largely untouched. The ecosystem is collapsing in measurable ways. Food webs are breaking down. Predator-prey relationships that existed for millennia have been destroyed. Biodiversity is plummeting. Scientists talk about ecological unraveling happening in real time. Some predict South Florida's natural environment may never recover, but the ecological damage pales compared to something else. The financial cost has reached staggering levels. The billion-dollar disaster. Let me walk you through the money. When you see the actual numbers, you'll understand why this might be the most expensive ecological mistake in American history. Initial costs. Capturing dragons in Indonesia cost $8.5 million. Transportation cost another $12 million. Setting up the release program infrastructure added $4.2 million. Total upfront cost, $24.7 million. Everyone assumed these would be one-time expenses. They were catastrophically wrong. Every single year now, Florida spends $72 million managing Komodo dragons, and that number keeps climbing. Emergency response teams cost $15 million annually. These teams respond to dragon sightings near schools and neighborhoods. Population control attempts cost $28 million each year. This includes hunting programs and trapping initiatives. None work well, but the state keeps funding them out of desperation. Human-dragon conflict management runs $19 million annually. Research programs cost $7 million per year. Public education campaigns cost $3 million annually. But those direct costs are just the beginning. Livestock losses total $34 million every year. Dragons kill cattle, horses, pigs, and chickens. Property damage adds another $21 million annually. Tourism has been devastated. The industry has lost $180 million per year. Insurance claims cost $45 million annually. Add all these numbers together. Before dragons, Florida spent about $500 million per year managing all invasive species combined. Now the state spends $500 million on the original invasives plus $380 million on dragons and dragon-related costs. That's $880 million total. The dragon program made Florida's invasive species problem 76% more expensive. Long-term projections are even worse. Economists predict dragons will cost Florida $2.1 billion over the next decade. Dragon populations are still growing. Costs will keep rising year after year. But throwing money at the problem hasn't solved anything. Every control measure has failed. Failed control measures. Florida threw everything possible at the dragon problem. None of it worked. Year 2 brought the first major control effort. The state launched a licensed hunting program with a $500 bounty per dragon killed. Hunters poured into South Florida ready to collect money. 3 years later, hunters had killed only 340 dragons. Meanwhile, the population was estimated between 8,000 and 12,000. The hunting program was a complete failure. Worse, it made surviving dragons more cautious. They learned to avoid humans. Daytime sightings dropped dramatically. Trapping programs failed even worse. Wildlife officials deployed large cage traps baited with meat. The first month caught decent numbers. Then catches dropped to almost nothing. Dragons figured out the traps within weeks. Officials then considered poison programs. But public backlash was immediate and fierce. Poison would kill alligators, crocodiles, panthers, pets, and countless other animals. The program was stopped before it started. Relocation seemed like another option. But dragons are incredibly aggressive and difficult to transport safely. Multiple handlers were injured. 2 died. The program was discontinued. Now, officials are discussing the ultimate irony: introducing another species to control the dragons. History repeating itself. The same failed logic that created this disaster. But understanding how they failed doesn't help the people. Living with dragons every day. Living with the nightmare. Between 8,000 and 12,000 Komodo dragons now live across South Florida. The population grows 12 to 15% every year. They're spreading northward into Central Florida at 15 miles per year. Experts agree on one thing: complete eradication is now impossible. The dragons are here to stay. Florida must learn to live with them. Daily life has changed completely in affected areas. Homeowners install dragon-proof fencing costing $15,000 to $30,000 per property. Children no longer play outside unsupervised. Parents watch constantly. Outdoor pets are kept indoors. Too many dogs and cats have been killed. Every morning, families do dragon checks before leaving their homes. They scan yards and driveways looking for dragons hiding in bushes or under vehicles. Schools have implemented dragon protocols. Outdoor recess happens only in fenced areas with armed security watching. Some schools eliminated outdoor activities entirely. Field trips to natural areas have been canceled permanently. The tourism industry has collapsed. Hotel occupancy rates dropped 40%. The tourism industry has collapsed. Hotel occupancy rates dropped 40%. Attractions have closed. Businesses have failed. Property values in affected areas fell 30 to 40%. People can't sell their homes. Nobody wants to move to dragon territory. The political fallout continues. Officials who approved the program faced criminal investigations. Victims filed lawsuits. The state has paid out hundreds of millions in settlements. The lessons came too late. Biocontrol almost never works as intended. Introducing apex predators produces cascading disasters. Ecosystems are too complex for simple solutions. Florida traded one crisis for something far worse. Now they're managing the original invasives plus dragons. The problem became exponentially larger. Billions will be spent over coming decades. Some areas of South Florida are essentially lost to dragons. People have abandoned entire neighborhoods. The solution became the worst ecological disaster in Florida history. A warning nobody will forget. If you found this video eye-opening, Make sure to like and subscribe. And check out the next video on your screen where we explore other environmental disasters that changed entire regions forever. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the cure is worse than the disease.